Welcome to a guest episode of the NERO Show featuring cycling news editor Josh Croxton.
Josh talks us through some of the results from their latest road bike Aero mega test, featuring some of the latest Aero bikes from the main brands.
The winners, the losers, what are the trends that he's seen from the fast bikes and some of the slow bikes?
And then we chat about how the bikes are chosen for a lot of these tests and why some of the Chinese bikes don't manage to make their way into it. All right, let's get into it. So, Josh, we want to speak about some of the results, but there's essentially three tests you did in the wind tunnel run here. You did bike only with the stock wheels, bike only with the MV 4.5s, and then the rider on the bike test results. Just out of curiosity, before we get into it, which results do you think we as consumers should be looking at first if we just want to see what's the fastest bike, what's the best bike?
Question straight off the bat. I think you kind of have to, certainly with the way that we've built our protocols and the way that we've tested, you kind of have to look at them all, or at least it depends, to give the age-old answer. From a realism point of view, the rider on the bike is, of course, most kind of real-world applicable in the sense that you've got the rider, you've got the pedaling legs interacting with the frame and the airflow, etc. But there is, with that, an element of kind of a bigger error for margin, just as a result of me being a human and mobile and slightly less repeatable than the bikes on their own. Having the bikes on their own is still valuable. Like I say, you've not got that kind of real world legs on the bike or human on the bike with the kind of the hands, the interaction of the cockpit and the body and all of the rest of it. That's not there. But I still think it, in connection with both tests together, there's kind of they work together to help people understand. I think if you saw one of the bikes miles faster than all the rest in one test and then miles slower than all the rest in the other, then it'll be a little bit harder to kind of use that data or use that to kind of make a decision.
All right, Chris, you pick. We're going to chat through some of the results. Do you want to go bike only or with the rider? And when Josh can run us through some of the numbers, what was quick, what was slow?
I reckon we go bike only, Jesse, the oldest test in the book. So, Josh, I mean, are there some headlines, some ones particularly that you can talk about that maybe we can dive into a little bit?
Yeah, totally, not a problem at all. So I think the standout fastest is that factor, that crazy factor we saw first at the Dauphiné earlier this year, then made an appearance at the Tour. Still hasn't launched yet. Still don't know officially what the kind of the name of the bike is. Don't know when it's going to launch. We assume it's, well, I say we assume it's UCI legal. That's what we've been told. Even with the
doesn't have a geometry chart, I'm told.
It doesn't have a geometry chart, and even just I've not ridden it. I'll put that out there. I've not ridden it, but the geometry on it is different. It's kind of more in line with the Ridley that has that progressive forward, more racy position. But yeah, I don't know too much on that. Haven't ridden it. Haven't received any kind of official documentation or anything from Factor on that. So, but anyway, results on this. That was fast. So apologies to anyone who likes the kind of the traditional bikes of 5-10 years ago, because this isn't that. But yeah, that's bike only at 40k an hour. That was a couple of watts, pretty much bang on 2 watts faster than second place. And then just to give you a kind of understanding of roughly where what that is in comparison to the rest, second through till 6th, 7th is about another 2 watts, so quite tight in a cohort. But then there is a few steps up to the kind of the next few bikes. So the Yankee is, doing the maths in my head quickly, about 12 watts off that factor. And the Elves Falath EXP is another 4 watts ish, rounding to whole numbers here, but 4 watts slower than that. So kind of the total cohort you're looking at there for bike only is about 16 watts. So So yeah, that factor is certainly the fastest on test, and a nice kind of nice for factor step above second place, which kind of is a bit of a result for them, I guess. And yeah, the baseline bike that we tested, which again similar to last year's test, that Trekker ALR, my old bike. Yeah, beautiful bike. It's that was about 40 watts off the factor. So that's kind of the interesting thing to see here is, and the point of the baseline is A, so we can kind of have a bit of repeatability year over year, but B, imagine you've got an old bike in your shed or your garage and you're thinking about upgrading. Like, what am I actually getting? What, like, I got 10 grand in the bank. I don't know. I've had a nice bonus from work or something, and you want to really treat yourself. You've got this old bike in the shed. Like, what's on the table? And that kind of is our way of showing that, of if you've got an old Commander ALR in your garage with box section rims and external cables and round tubes, no real aerodynamic optimization to it, then switching to the fastest bike in our test, you got 40 watts on the table, which that does reduce somewhat when you've got a rider on, which I'm sure we'll get into the rider on numbers in a bit. But yeah, there's a significant saving to be had there. It's obviously a fairly big outlay for a aero bike like this, and again, we can get into the details of this later, but there are cheaper ways to save, to go faster. But yeah, that's to kind of give you the full swing of the factor is about 40 watts faster than the baseline. The elves, which, as I've already mentioned, came at the bottom of this rider bike only test, that was 34 watts. No, 24 watts, doing the maths in my head again, faster than the baseline. So still a significant saving, but there's your two ends of the spectrum, I guess.
The elves was an interesting one because when you tested it just on its own, it was the slowest out of the Aero bikes. But then when you put a rider on it, it's just nicely well in the mid pack. How do you think that's possible? What would you speculate's going on there to cause that kind of jump?
Could be one of a few things. It could be that it performed well with a rider on, or it could be that it performed badly with a rider off. It goes one of two ways. Their wording on it, or their kind of what elves say, is kind of the tube profiles have been designed specifically to be used with a rider and channel the airflow efficiently around the rider, which I'm sure a lot of brands say similar things, and I've not dug into that in any real depth, but they're saying that. A couple of things that maybe helped or hindered it from kind of an our test point of view is, to my knowledge, it was the only bike with a 3D printed saddle. Of course, without a rider, the saddle is catching the airflow. So that lattice 3D printed is catching the air. I don't know for definite. Again, this is something you see in hindsight and you go, maybe we should have tested or looked at that. But maybe next year we'll try and get a saddle sponsor or something to normalize that. But the other thing that maybe helped it with a rider on is it had a fairly narrow handlebar. Not drastically so compared to anything else on test, but again, just trying to maybe shed some light on why it tested like that. But yeah, from an L's point of view, I was quite happy. Like the people I dealt with at Elves were really, really helpful, really forthcoming with information, really keen to be involved, and to a point, just really happy to be involved in the test, which is quite funny. But yeah, so I was, I had, I wouldn't say a soft spot, but I certainly warmed to the brand. I've not dealt with them prior to this. So yeah, I warmed to them a little bit over the course of this.
The Scott Foil was an interesting one. We've been pretty positive on that bike for some time, and it was a mid pack. To go into too much detail, but it was a mid packer. We've sort of speculated that potentially some of that is due to those Dura-Ace wheels that were spec'd on it.
The Shimano wheels that are on it, they're not known for being fast. We tested them in our wheels big group test of wheels. We had 18 wheel sets, and they were the second slowest of the kind of the aero cohort. But and in that test, there were 3.5 watts behind those scopes, or
Yeah.
different scopes. The Artex 6As, these were kind of the ones that we tested on the Argon 18. This test were a slightly updated version of that. But yeah, that is the Shimano wheels aren't fast. But at the same time, even with the MVs, the standardized test, the Scott didn't get significantly faster. I think it was half a watt, something like that it improved by with those wheels. So all bikes can be improved by putting a fast set of wheels on. But the main thing that I kind of look at with the Scott foil is that bike was launched in 22, which is pre the UCI changing the rules around the tube shapes and the head tube compensation triangle. And I think that's probably more of a correlation there.
Yeah.
If we're looking at the yaw angle plots, which is kind of interesting because when you look at Tour Magazine's testing, they very rarely do you get this level of detail where you can see the performance at the different yaw angles. If we kind of look at just that at a high level, is there any sort of takeaways that you have from looking at how two bikes that when you average the yaw angles maybe have similar performance that have a different sort of profile across yours? Do you have any sort of analysis on that?
A little. I think the kind of the yaw weighting thing, which I'll get into shortly, is quite certainly from the people I've spoken to, there's no definitive, this is how you do it approach. Everyone kind of seems to have their own approach, or that everybody seems to agree, or most brands seem to agree that doing it is correct, but to which degree is kind of a little bit more up in the air. But I think the standout, certainly in the bike only, is that factor is fast across all yaw. How and why that is I'm unsure. I can kind of make some guesses and some assumptions, of course, but it's one of the only bikes that is pretty much equal across the whole. It's like a flat line, so it doesn't matter what angle of attack.
It looks like it even gets faster at the more the yaw. Extraordinary.
Yeah, and that suggests that the bike is sailing. You see that same profile faster at higher yaw with wheels, and it suggests that that's what they've achieved there. Of course, how that then translates when there's a rider on it is hard to kind of conclude with any real authority. But that's the one that stands out for me. The Colnago, I think it was a similar profile in that it manages to sail, or at least gets faster at those higher yaw. So maybe that's the future of the Aero bike. Maybe that's why these crazy designs are coming out. That's the saving that's on the table, or that's the magic that's in there. Unsure.
Yeah, like if I'm with in the graph with the rider on bike test, and when you compare what the chart of the Cervélo S5 looks like compared to the Y1 RS, it's markedly different. Do you have any idea of what would that feel like on the road? That sort of Y1 compared to an S5, where the S5 is like a V, and the Y1 RS is like a set of aeroplane wings. It's sort of fast at zero, comes up, and then it gets really flattens off. What sort of road situations would you feel that on, or would you not really notice?
I don't know. I don't know that you'd necessarily notice it. I think a bike that's fast at higher yaw I don't think that's necessarily would mean it's more stable. If anything, it's catching the wind, so I don't know if that would even go the other way. I'm guessing this is me kind of thinking aloud a little bit here, but
that's what we do here, Josh.
yeah, the hard-hitting questions. But no, that's a tough one. I don't think it's something that you'd necessarily feel. I think
Mm.
maybe you'd see it in results on a windy day if you went out and did a TT, compared to I don't know, let's say you've got a local club 10 and you do it every week. You might see something in the numbers there, but yeah, feeling is I think you'd struggle. But maybe
Mm.
I'm wrong. Maybe there are certainly pros out there who've got a lot more time in the saddle than I have that might be able to feel that sort of thing a little bit better. But yeah, I know people are more or less sensitive to things.
Yeah, because I always had curiosity as well. It's like, what's technically more difficult? Is it is it is it more of an engineering and aerodynamic problem to solve to make a bike like the Y1RS that's more consistent across the yaw angles compared to an S5 with more of that V style on the graph? Like, I wonder from a manufacturer's point of view, is that a more modern, more difficult profile to come to?
Hard question. I'm not an engineer. I wouldn't. I'd love to get to see behind that curtain.
Mm.
I'd love to shadow someone like Graham Shrive, who's kind of designer at Factor, for example, or even somebody at like a World Tour team that's kind of working with the brands on prototyping and designing bikes. That would be a very nice way to spend a day,
Mm-hmm.
shadowing that kind of level of expertise and seeing what goes into that. But
Is it worth just dropping really quickly into the way you weight the your stuff? Because ultimately that's you're giving a baseline figure at the end of both these, that takes into account all these different tests. You look at the S5 head on 0 degrees yaw, it's a rocket ship, and then it sort of gets slower and slower as it goes out to different degrees. Do you maybe just want to quickly discuss how you actually weight the different yaw angles?
the background of where we came to this or how we came to this was a guy called Nathan Barry who works at Cannondale in their aerodynamics something. I don't know exactly. Um, he reached out following our first test on helmets and kind of had a little bit of a conversation around the way that we've done things, the way that they do things, and it turns out his PhD was in weightings, or kind of I can't remember the long title of it, but it's ultimately a PhD was deciding on the best way to weight so that wind tunnel testing is applicable to the real world. So, in the absence of an alternative approach at the time, that's the kind of the one that we went for. We had a little bit of a look around in terms of who else is doing it. Spoke to a few other brands, and um, it seemed as good as any in terms of the best way to do it. And the weightings that we use, which are his recommendations, are so the weighting at 0 is given 100% value weighting. At 5 degrees, that's down to 0.857, obviously plus or minus either side. 10 degrees, that's 0.543, and then at 15 degrees, that's 0.237. I've not got beyond 15 in front of me, but that kind of gives you that bell curve. So
Yeah.
very high importance at your 0 because that's how often you see it in comparison to the rest. 5 and plus or minus 5, obviously it drops off. And again, don't need to explain a bell curve, but that's kind of the weightings that we give. And yeah, we take the go very much down a rabbit hole that probably isn't necessary, but we take the CDA measurement from the wind tunnel, the raw number as it comes out of the software at each of those degrees. We multiply it by the weighting, work out the average with that weighting applied, and then that becomes our new weighted average. So, of course, it affects the end average. A bike that is super fast at 0 yaw and less fast at high yaw will be favored by this. And I'll explain. I don't want it to kind of come across as an unfair favoring. I think I'll get to that in a second, but a bike that is kind of flat but not fast, say it's mid-table across the board, is but slower at zero yaw, and kind of faster than the rest at high yaw, will be negatively affected by this because we're weighting more towards zero. And I say that kind of favoring thing. The point of weighting is that people have done a lot of research into how often these wind conditions are found, and it is accepted fairly across the board that you see low yaw significantly more often than you see high yaw. And the one thing actually that's probably also worth pointing out is that the weightings that we apply here, from Nathan Barry's PhD, is actually quite a conservative approach. We've spoken to quite a few brands, certainly wheel brands, and they favor, or they weight more heavily towards zero. So a reasonably conservative approach here, but certainly one that we stand by. And I think what's also important is we've not changed it from last year's test. We're not kind of adjusting it this time round because of variable X, Y, or Z, and therefore kind of the weightings translate a little bit better.
One of the pushbacks to some of the wind tunnel tests that I see online is that, okay, you weight the yaw angles and that's fine, but out in the real world, the wind is just swirling all around, and you turn a corner and you change a direction, and so even though you weight the yaw angles appropriately, it doesn't have that wishy-washy effect that you sort of get out on the road. How much, do you have an opinion on that? Does that mean, some people would say that makes the wind tunnel testing, even best-in-class wind tunnel testing, just not applicable to the road?
I take it on board. I wouldn't necessarily fully agree with it. I think both types of testing, real world and wind tunnel, have their place, are both useful. I think the wind tunnel allows a significantly higher degree of accuracy in a controlled environment, but of course the environment being controlled means that the wind is controlled, obviously. And with that, you might not get some of the kind of the effect of a bike in the blustery conditions, but you are measuring it across various different wind conditions. And if you can be confident that whether it's at each yaw point, a bike is faster, or on average across the most likely to be experienced average of yaws, hence weighting, then you can be pretty confident that across the blustery conditions that you're going to be riding in, or the windy conditions or whatever, that the faster bike in the wind tunnel is still probably going to be faster. You can be confident it's going to be faster in the real world. And I think I kind of liken it to a bit of a head start in a race. It doesn't mean that the person with the head start, or the bike that is measured faster in a wind tunnel, that is coming out 2 watts faster, that's its head start. Doesn't mean that that's going to be winning all the time or faster in all conditions all the time, but you'll take the odds. You'll take that bike because it's got that 2 watt improvement, or that 2 watt kind of head start, I guess, or that slight improvement. So a little bit of a metaphorical way of thinking about it. But like I say, I think, if it's fast at zero yaw, it's fast at 5, 10, and 15, and then you're seeing conditions that you're riding along at 35, 40k an hour, the wind's reasonably blustery, you're probably still experiencing wind from minus 15 to 15, or somewhere in between that. So in those conditions, you can be pretty confident that the faster bike is still going to be faster.
Have you ever chatted with any brands that have tested that? I'd love to see, right? So take all the bikes from your wind tunnel and set up like an outdoor loop, and then redo the test, and then be like, see? The wind tunnel results lined up exactly with our outdoor loop, for example. And maybe they didn't. They all flipped on their head, and you went, oh, what are we even doing here? But are you aware of anyone that's ever sort of tried to do that back to back?
I'm not aware of any real examples. I know that teams are they'll go out and do velodrome testing. So they'll go. They're in Mallorca doing a training camp, and they've got the velodrome nearby. They'll go out and do that. They'll also then validate that same position in a wind tunnel, or probably vice versa, or the other way around. But that there is definitely that. I don't know necessarily that anybody's done it with 12 bikes like we've tested here.
So it was a bit of a stupid question because if the wind's blustery, it's not controlled, and so the results won't be any good anyway. So that was probably just an impossible, unless you had like a turbulent air wind tunnel where you could do exactly the same turbulent air repeatably, I guess. So yeah,
we'll just get next time we're there. We'll just get a couple of Wahoo kicker headwinds and just point them at the side, and we'll have someone pressing buttons on them.
Yeah,
just move them in and out as you go. Yeah.
A couple of oscillating office fans at the side as well. No, I don't know of anybody doing it, and I think I'm sure there are people who probably more from a personal testing of their position or their setup. Let's say you're an aspiring pro, an age grouper, or even a world tour kind of level athlete, and maybe that's something where you'll do the wind tunnel testing, and then you'll go out to a real world with something like a body rocket sensor or similar.
You mentioned the elves had the narrower handlebars. So how did you, with the rider on test, get the body in the same position?
A couple of tools that helped us there, and a couple of kind of things. The main one is Silverstone has the edge markings, which are essentially, it takes an outline of you on the first bike and then projects that onto the floor so that you can match your position. The way that we started the test is we chose a bike with the middling level of handlebar width. So of course we spent the entire day and a few days prior measuring positions, making sure that everything was as close as we could get it. And yeah, we kind of chose a bike that was as average or as central as we could, so that I wasn't taking an edge with a 44 centimeter bar and then trying to match that on a 38. I don't think the range didn't go that far, but we tested on the Y1 RS first because that was one of the most kind of central positions in terms of the handlebar width, the reach, and the stack. And then that gave me a nice edge markings to work from. We put my hands in the drops so that there was an element of fore and aft movement that I could use to kind of match the reach, where we couldn't perfect it with the setup. But then the width wise, it was only ever going to be, I think it was 1.5 centimeters away from that central edge. So I just roll my hands in, roll my hands out as much as I could to match it. And I'll concede it's an imperfect solution. I'll put that in the article that it's imperfect, but it's to a point we're at the whim of what brands will send us. And also, this might be met with a bit of controversy, but I think we've also got to take into account if a brand sells a bike with a 44 centimeter handlebar, and another one is selling a bike with a 36 centimeter handlebar. We're aero testing the bikes, we're not aero testing the frames. So to a point, you've got to kind of think, actually, should I be taking this bike apart and swapping it out and putting a 36 centimeter handlebar to standardize it, when actually if somebody goes out and buys that bike and gets the 44 centimeter bar, they're going to end up with a bike that's slower than our test suggests. So
it's really interesting when you do go through the article, Josh. Obviously, at the end, you detail every bike that you got, the specs on it, etc., etc. And obviously, there's images that go along with it. And as you sort of scroll down, and it's kind of from sort of fastest to slowest. No, it was from slowest to fastest, I think. But there is, I think, potentially some sort of common threads or some factors that seem to be appearing as you kind of see these faster bikes appearing. The one that I kind of notice is the head tube and potentially even the thickness or the width of it. Is that something that you noticed? Is there any other common traits that you saw amongst the slower or the faster ones?
Yeah, so I think you're right on the head tube thing. We didn't measure. Again, it's one of those things that in hindsight you look at it and go, there's a bit of a correlation there. You don't notice it as you putting the bikes through in a random order. But I think without wanting to state the obvious, the less, well, the smaller the A in CDA, of course, it's going to be faster. So that kind of makes sense.
Yep.
But the thing that stands out to me more than anything is the kind of bikes designed pre the UCI rule change and then post UCI rule change. And just to clarify that, it's 2023 they announced they scrapped the 3-to-1 tube dimension shape rule thing, and instead it was changed to a minimum plane of minimum plane of a centimeter, 10 mil, and then a maximum of 8 centimeters. And then also changes on the compensation triangles at the front meant head tubes could actually be as closer to 16 centimeters deep. And if you look at the top half of this table, kind of is it's all of those bikes. So the Factor is there. The Ridley Noah with its mega deep head tube is in there. The Cervélo S5, the Y1 RS, the Van Rysel, the Dare, the Uno X were riding till last year, all kind of in that top half of the table. And then the Scott Foil, which is pre 2023, is slightly lower down. The Bianchi, which was designed back in 2019, I think, even pre-pandemic, and that got slowed down, and so I think it only launched in 2022. But that was designed well before those rule changes, and likewise, the Merida Reactor launched in 2020, maybe 21. So that's the kind of the big thing that I notice is that change enabled bikes to get more aerodynamic and arguably brought about the return of the Aero bike that we're kind of seeing in 2025, which so don't necessarily want to get into it too much, but now that the UCI is trying to slow the peloton down again, it's a little bit short-sighted, but it's an odd one. I think it's a short-sighted vision to make bikes faster or enable bikes to become faster in 2023, and then 2025 they're talking about trying to slow the peloton down, and doing so in such a way that costs brands money, like the R&D going into designing things, and then they change the rules at the drop of a hat. I've heard bike brands talking about this. I've heard wheel brands. The Swiss side came out and slammed the UCI for this, but then also affecting things like bike fit of smaller riders by changing the handlebars. I think it's a strange to do that 2 years apart is odd, in my opinion.
In your test was the Argon 18 prototype, which is now being released, and I noticed that it got widespread coverage in the cycling media when it was released. Cycling, Cycling News, you guys did an article on it. Ruler, Road CC, Bike Radar, Cyclist, Bike Biz, Bike Rumor. And then you compare that with something like the Elves, which was also in the test, but has basically no mention anywhere in any of the cycling media. And I found that interesting because Argon 18 isn't in the World Tour. It's not that, at least in Australia and many other places, it's not that popular a brand. I was quite surprised when they released the bike and it was picked up very well by the media. Why is that? How can they get the big articles and some other brands don't manage to do it?
The joys of the potluck of media, I guess. I genuinely don't know. I can only really speak to cycling news coverage, and from our side, it was a case of we were in touch with Argon 18 prior to the test. A little bit of a chance email from them talking about their new bike, and actually mentioned that they think it would have done well in our previous wind tunnel test. This is whilst I was pulling bikes together for the new one, so it kind of made sense that we would include it. The reason we covered it from a news angle, multifold, I guess. We'd seen the bike already. Of course, we'd had it in the test prior to the launch, and we thought this is an interesting bike. It looks super cool. It's obviously progressive from an aerodynamics point of view, mega deep head tube and a bottom bracket that I don't know if there's anybody actually really picked up on this, but the bottom bracket shell comes up higher than the big chainring, which I don't think I've seen
Uh,
before.
Wow.
Which it's enormous. um,
Yeah.
but then the to a point, selfishly, we also kind of wanted people to read that and then get steered towards our uh, test because we tested that bike and it went live the same day. So yeah, there was a little bit of a kind of selfishness to it, but at the same time, we also felt like we should probably just give it a short story to say a little bit of a thanks for letting us borrow it pre kind of prior to their embargo
Release.
and in a prototype form. So from our side, that's kind of our motivations as to why. Trying to think of why everybody else would have given it the coverage. I think um, there was a launch event. They put on an event over in Copenhagen. I don't know who went
uh,
to that. We turned it down. So there was an element of people getting hands on with the bike prior to its launch. Like I say, we turned it down. The logistics of it, timing wise, didn't work. We were busy with the wind tunnel test as another thing.
mhm.
But also from a content opportunity point of view, we've already had hands on the bike. We've got a test of it, which is going to be more value, we think, than a first ride review. We will review that bike separately anyway. So it was agreed that we'd miss the launch event and we'd try and arrange the bike for a review kind of as soon as we can. Um, but then I suppose from a motivation point of view, I guess we're at the end of the busy season, so maybe that helped them a little bit launching it
Mm.
when they did. From a tech news point of view, the Vuelta's never particularly super uh, super active, so um, a lot of our competitors who don't focus on the racing probably a little bit of a quieter period for them. Again, I'm guessing I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
work for them, but that's kind of my take. So yeah, that's kind of I don't know for definite, but there was an element of outreach from the brand as well. I know just to go back to that Elves comparison, when that Baloth EXP launch um, we didn't hear from them. They did no PR or anything like that. Um,
Mm,
so until the bike was out there, we didn't know it was coming. So that helps as well.
definitely, yeah.
But yeah, there's multifaceted, I'm sure, and it struck me as an odd one, a little bit of an odd one as well. Certainly, bike biz don't tend to cover uh, bike launches. Um, so to see it there was a bit of a surprise. But say the guys at Argon are wonderful people. So yeah, I've got a lot of time for Alex and the guys over there who yeah. So I was, again, happy to see that they got the coverage there.
You did include some stuff around combining both the 2024 and the 2025 results, which I found really interesting. Um, do you want to maybe just talk about like how how comparable are these tests? Because I suppose the backstory to this is, we often reference the Tour magazine testing, which obviously, could be 12 months ago, could be 2 years ago, could be 10 years ago, some of these tests. Um, how are you, how confident are you comparing results 12 months later?
To give you an exact number, about 0.65 watts confident.
Okay.
Good.
I
Thank you.
know that seems a little bit kind of shocky, but like that there's a lot of context to that. And let me kind of take a step back. So the reason we take the old trusty Trekker ALR along is because we own that bike. Well, I own that bike. I can take it back next year, the year after. I can leave it in our store at the office and not touch it at all, so that next year when we take it back, it's exactly the same as it was when we tested it this year. So rather than simply testing the Madone last year or the Tarmac SL8 last year, and coming out with a number of, I don't know, like a CDA of, let's say, zero point 0.3 with a rider on, super rounded, but and then coming back this year and then testing the factor and coming out with a number of 0.29 with a rider on, and then just calling it a difference of 0.01. That doesn't, in our testing, that wouldn't work. I don't know enough about Flaw protocol to be able to comment on how accurate theirs is. They've been doing it a hell of a lot longer than I have. I massively respect those guys over there, and they know what they're doing, I'm sure. But if we went and did it like I've just suggested, we would get quite a big error. So just to give some context or some numbers to that, we tested the Scott foil both years, 2024 and 2025, and we tested the Amonda both years. The Amonda in 2025 was 5.43 watts faster than the Amonda in 2024, with the slight caveat that we dropped the spacer down ever so slightly to match the positions. The Scott foil, we didn't change the position. And in 2025, it was 6.17 watts faster than it was in 2024. So if we did just take it as this was the result in 25 and this is the result in 24, then we'd be kind of working to a fairly big margin.
On that, Scott, so there's no changes to that bike? That's the exact same setup, exact same yaw weighting, exact same wind tunnel speed? Everything
the same. The only thing different is the rear tire, because we got a puncture when test riding it. But everything else was exactly the same. Front tires, same GP5000 as we standardized across the bikes. So yeah, it's 6 watts faster.
And that's bike only. So that's at that sort of, what was the range of, that was at sort of the 60 to 70 watt range. There's 10% difference in a year in the same test.
So that's the error that we would be working to if we tried to test it that way, which is why, and again, this isn't something that we learned and then changed our approach. We were told this by Silverstone when we first went there, and they said, if you try it like this, it won't work. So we would ensure that we didn't.
That's interesting.
And with that, like I say, we take the Amonda along, we test the bikes against the Amonda, and then that's why we report the difference rather than a total aerodynamic resistance. And the numbers on that, they're in the article, but again, I don't mind sharing them here in that with the bike only, the difference the difference between the Scott foil and the Amonda last year was 34.98 watts, and this year 35.66, which is 0.68 watts different. And then with the rider on, the difference between the foil and the Amonda in 2024 was 19.79 watts. In 2025, it was 19.15 watts, which is a difference of 0.64 watts. So comparing Superbike, Aero Bike versus Amonda enables us to kind of normalize against any change in atmospheric conditions, things like that, because we're testing the difference between two bikes on the same day every time, rather than testing the difference between 2025 Scott and 2024 Scott, or 25 Scott against 24 Cervélo, for example. So
is the wind tunnel taking into account the atmospheric conditions?
It's not normalizing against them, it's measuring the CDA. And this goes a little bit above my head in terms of exactly how the science of the wind tunnel measurement works. But we tear it in the sense of we do the offset prior to each test to make sure that any kind of imbalances are sorted. But and also the pressure in I think it's pressure in the wind tunnel section itself. I don't want to say normalized, because that's probably not the right word, but an example as to what I'm trying to get at here is if you open a door in the room next door to the wind tunnel and the pressure around it drops, or the pressure in there drops at all, you can hear the fans pick up speed because it's normalizing against that, so that the wind speed hitting the bike or the rider or the thing being tested is always the same. So it's sophisticated. It's really, really smart bit of kit, and
Right.
probably many hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of equipment go into it. So yeah, it goes well above my head in terms of the exact how it works.
So Silverstone weren't concerned that the raw numbers for the same setup a year on year was 10% different.
I've not taken it to them, but and I think probably worth doing, and I'm happy to share that with you if we get that. But yeah, uh, the advice from them was, this is going back a year, but the advice from them is testing the same things a year apart isn't going to give you the same number because of those differences in atmospheric conditions. And then, yeah, just to kind of take this full circle back to the tour test, I've only ever used the Silverstone wind tunnel. I know it's a very sophisticated one. It's designed for cycling. But I have no idea if different wind tunnels do things differently. I don't doubt for a second that Tour Magazine tests are as repeatable as they say. So yeah, I think it's.
I wouldn't be so sure. So the reason why I keep pressing is because Cervélo's response about the Tour Magazine testing was that, well, because of the atmospheric conditions, we're a bit. I can't. Chris, you can probably put the quote up. It was sort of like we would question how consistent you can be year on year because of the atmospheric conditions, but then Tour Magazine's in their article, when they break down how they test, they say we're confident of a 1 watt difference year on year between any test, and so they were just in disagreement. But it sounds like what's happened with your testing at Silverstone is kind of almost what Cervélo said, that would be it would be normal not to compare raw numbers year on year. So that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know how. It's interesting to figure out, and maybe I could probably email Robert from Tour Magazine, like, how are they actually normalizing that year on year? Do they have a secret formula in their wind tunnel that Silverstone don't have?
It could well be. Again, it goes well above my level of knowledge on it. It could well be that they're able to normalize air pressure in there, normalize air density, things like that. Maybe. And it's yeah, different wind tunnels could to my knowledge, could be completely different in the way that they work things. So I don't know enough about the tour protocol and the tunnel they use, and basically the tour test as a whole, to be able to say with any authority. So yeah, one for them.
The only other one I had was less about the testing, guys, and it was just more in terms of how popular this stuff is. Obviously, you'd have some idea, Josh, of the clicks these articles are getting in comparison to your usual tech stuff, your pro cycling stuff. Obviously, Cycling News covers the length and breadth of everything cycling related at this point. Are people into this, or is this bubble that Jesse and I are in just so small that we're just talking to each other at this point?
As much as I'd love to tell you that you're just talking to each other and have a little joke, no, there are enough nerds like us out there, I think. And yeah, compared to racing coverage, tech content as a whole it almost entirely depends on how interesting the subject matter is. So, muck off, launch a tire lever. Probably not going to get very much traffic.
Not getting the clicks? Come on, muck off.
Likewise, if some unknown NERO Pro signs for AG2R, it's probably not going to get the clicks. So there's definitely an element of, is it actually interesting? But testing like this is, people do like it. People do click on it. People do like to read it. And from a content success point of view, like this it's early stages, but this should be our most successful piece of content for subscriber engagement and probably also subscriber growth. So
that's cool.
People do like it, and as I say, it's good for me because I like doing it, and I think we've been super careful to make sure that the testing is very, very clearly impartial, very clearly outlined, just to try and really build that trust that we're not fiddling the numbers, we're not just pandering to people who put advertising on cycling news, things like that. We're doing a fully impartial test. Bike brands don't have to be involved, but thankfully a lot of them are keen to be involved. And yeah, from a how many aero nerds are there out there? Like people, there are enough of them to thankfully to
Are
keep
the
to enable me to do it.
are the brands taking it seriously? Like, I find this interesting in the sense of, like, I would have thought they're sending you the most optimized setup possible to try and, probably sending 32 millimeter bars to try and just absolutely go nuts at this test. Or is it like, oh, I think there's a spare bike at the warehouse, I will chuck one at you, see what's left. Like, or does it depend from brand to brand?
It very much depends. It's kind of funny.
Okay.
And actually, this is probably I've Bianchi. We've not really spoken about them too much. I mentioned at the start that they didn't do brilliantly in this, but I spoke to Claudio, their global, I think he's their global marketing manager, after the test, and had a good chat about it. And his kind of response was, "We could have not sent a bike. We designed this bike in 2019. We knew it wasn't going to be competing with some of the others here, but we wanted to be involved. We wanted to kind of support the test, and I think that's really from my point of view, the trust from a brand to do a solid job is really kind of reassuring. But also for them to want to support the test and be involved, I think is really cool, even knowing that they're probably up against it. But then similarly, some brand, well, yeah. So to go back to the original question, some brands don't take it massively seriously, and that's not a negative on them. Like, they're still involved. Some brands refuse to be involved, and
Who refuses?
Well, there's no Orbea, and I reckon that's glaring,
Mm.
personally.
so Orbea
No,
didn't want to be. Their bike is I can't remember the exact wording of the reason, but it was ultimately the bike's a few years old, and um, they didn't necessarily want to be involved with that. There's a couple of bikes that we are expecting new ones, and as a result, they didn't want to send their old one. Merida was a funny one actually, in that they did send their old one despite
Yeah.
having a new one clearly at the tour. Um, but then I think the most, and then some brands just sent the bike, or so we're connected to Cycling Weekly through Future Publishing, our publishing house. So some brands, we ask for the bike and they go, "Oh, Cycling Weekly have got one in for a review. Can you borrow theirs?" And it's not a case of, "Oh, you've got this cool test and we really want to optimize." It's more
yeah. Oh,
there's one
it's
over
lying
there.
around.
Yeah.
Steve's got it. Yeah.
But then I've already mentioned Argon 18 and Factor. Argon 18, the bike launched on the day that we published the test. And they were at Silverstone the week before we were due to be going there. So they left the bike there for us, which was really cool. Factor, actually, they were so close to kind of having a bike in production. I think what we tested was the prototype. I don't know for definite, but having seen it at the tour, I think we just got one of the ones from the tour. But somebody actually flew the bike to the UK from their head office or their office in Girona, and then hand delivered it to Silverstone for us.
That's sick.
Despite the bike not actually existing yet
Not
officially,
being real. Yeah.
Which from a kind of a trust point of view is really confidence boosting from us. It's a nice stamp of approval, I guess. Is probably not the right term, but for a brand to trust us with an empirical test on their bike prior to its launch, with almost certainly Argon and Factor, both of those bikes are Aero bikes. So if we came out and said, this thing's slow, then and here's the wind tunnel data to prove it, we could ruin their launch of this new bike they've spent years developing. And from there's two sides to that. Is A, they trust us enough to do a fair test, which is really, that's a massive compliment to me and to the team. But also, it shows that they're confident in the bike that they've
Confident
designed.
in the bike. Yeah.
Yeah, because if they weren't and they thought there's a good chance we could fall short here, then would you trust it to a third party prior to the launch? I don't know. So yeah, I think to go back to the question, there's a definite mixed bag. But I'd love to get it to a point where people are or brands are taking it super seriously. But at the same time, I kind of don't want brands to be trying to hack the system. I don't want brands to be sticking on 36 centimeter bars in a 1x chainring and a set of 80 mil deep wheels and calling that the bike that they're going to sell to everybody, because unless it is available off the shelf, then I do want it to remain a fair test rather than just one or two brands hacking the system or trying to.
Where would the sort of the do-it-alls fit in these results? The SL8s or the Madone? Do you have numbers on that? Because these were all aero optimized, chunked out bikes.
Well, from a results point of view, that combined test using the comparison against the Amonda, the bike only, you've got the fastest bike last year, which was the Factor Ostro VAM without a rider. That sits 8th or 9th. Again, just a quick count. In terms of what's saved, sorry, that sits behind a lot of the bikes from this test. But it's still kind of slightly behind the dedicated Aero bikes, but for an Aero all-rounder, that's kind of where you'd hope to see it, I guess. Then with the rider on, there's still an element of, there's a bigger element of margin in terms of this year's test. We had that 1.73 watt swing. Last year, the swing was higher, and as a result, the results from last year's test, you could theoretically push bikes that tested last year higher into the table just with that margin in account. But if we temporarily ignore that margin, then the fastest with a rider, the podium, the top three, were from this year's test, but then fourth place goes to the Tarmac SL8, which was the fastest from last year's test. When you then factor in that error margin, the Tarmac could still come top, but that's my read on that is more because of the bigger error margin rather than necessarily the Tarmac actually being a dedicated faster bike than the Cervélo or the Factor prototype.
So just to make sure I'm on the right page, does that mean then, because I'm looking at with rider power at 40 kilometers an hour, that the SL8 could be up there with the Ridley Noah Fast and the Dare and the Van Rysel?
Yeah, actually comes out slightly faster. So it's what's saved versus the Amonda is 22 and a half watts. Whereas you've got the Dare 21.9, for example. So yeah, it's up there, and that more than anything kind of goes to show that with a rider, the effect of the rider on the bike is still the most or the important thing. And I think that's not to say you shouldn't buy an Aero bike, of course, because there are the odd watt here and there to be saved. But yeah, I think it kind of goes to show that the margins here are still quite small, even comparing an Aero bike to an all-rounder.
That's quite interesting. So unless essentially you're buying one of these hyper Aero bikes, like the top three in this test, which are above, that you could just pick an SL8 toss a coin over that whole massive, heavy Ridley Noah Fast, and aerodynamically you could be just as good.
2 hour data, and with a rider on, like I say, the aero margin. I think what's important to say that tarmac, trying to remember off the top of my head the aero margin we had last year. It was in the region of about 3 watts.
Okay.
And that that tarmac therefore could climb to the top of the table, but it could also fall to very much near the bottom of the table, because everything is within certainly that middle cohort of bikes. You've kind of got the S5 and the Factor prototype, which are a nice little step ahead.
Okay.
But everything else from kind of 4th down to 15th, 20th position ish is all really, really close, all within about 3 or 4 watts of each other. So imagine the tarmac does, you take 3 watts off the tarmac and you put 3 watts onto the Merida reactor, for example, this time round, and then they kind of normalize each other out a little bit. So it's, yeah, I say that's not to say the tarmac isn't as fast or isn't a fast bike, and likewise, it's not to say that the tarmac would be faster with a rider on it on any given day. As I say, that kind of you take it because error margins work both ways, but yeah, it's still worth taking with a bit of a pinch of salt. And also, I suppose if you ask me to conclude, my read on it would be a little bit like, is my bike that I'm interested in buying in the ballpark? And only if you really, really, really care about that kind of 2-3 watt difference, even 1 watt difference, should you be kind of weighting it super heavily in your decision making process. I think you take this, you maybe look at Tour's test, you look at any others, you even probably look at the tests that the brands are doing themselves and read between the lines a little bit there, and you go, is my bike in the ballpark of fast or is it not? And then if it's not, then maybe it helps affect your decision. But assuming it is, then you can then kind of look at other things, other factors like the handling, like the tire clearance, like the weight of the bike, like the price of the bike, the various other things that come into that decision making process.
Don't you find that Chris, what do you reckon? Are you following where my head's at? Because what I'm thinking is, but at least by the time you put a rider on it, based on these results, unless you're picking a 2025 release top performing bike, which is, there's only 3 of them there, Y1, Factor prototype, or the S5. If you're in those middle rung kind of clunky aero bikes, you're like, by the time you put a rider on it, you may as well get a do it all.
I'm a little bit more with Josh on his margin of error across these rider on tests from year to year, potentially moving the numbers on these guys up and down quite considerably. I'm actually spending more time looking at the no rider results, to be honest with you, especially if we're comparing year to year. I mean, and you can absolutely measure it, get yourself lined up, Josh. Geez, you better not put any weight on year to year, because that rider test's going to be completely set off.
Don't go to the gym.
But yeah, that's sort of, yeah, don't go to the gym. No upper body work for you. Yeah, so I don't know.
No danger
I haven't gone that far, Jesse. I haven't gone that far. Do you have any questions for us?
Too in depth? I guess the big one for me is, I try and ask everybody this, is what would you test? Where can we take this? I'm always kind of open to ideas and open to suggestion. And
say less. Let me go. All right. I would remove the irrelevant bikes. Dare, irrelevant. Ridley, irrelevant. Cube, no, keep the Cube. And I would take those irrelevant ones and replace them with more Chinese ones, like the Quick Pro, like just the trending ones, Windspace T1600. And then in the test, I would also include a few do-it-alls. Because I think that's the crux of it, is do I get to do it all or do I get a dedicated aero bike? So in terms of bike selection, that's what I'd want to see.
Yeah, and it's on our radar. One of the reasons we include the elves this time round is we wanted to kind of show is maybe not elves being one of the kind of the trending like the wind space you mentioned, or the Cervélo, or the
it was just like full kudos for doing that, because that was our criticism of the wheel test, was that there was no direct to consumer. No, sorry, I don't know why I keep saying direct to consumer. Just Chinese or cheaper wheel brands.
Yeah, no, that's totally fair, and yeah, I think even beyond bikes, beyond frames, as I say, we've tested various things. We've done helmets, we've done clothing, we've done aero socks, we've done wheels, as I say.
Well, this probably wouldn't get that many views, but I would be curious to get like a size 50 and a size 61 S5, same spec, and get the equivalent size in like another 2 different bikes, and see if the fast bike is fast across the sizes. Probably wouldn't be very interesting to people, but I'd be curious. Chris, what do you want to see?
No, I think you hit the nail on the head for me. It's get rid of the irrelevant bikes, bring in the ones that are even the ones that the Chinese ones that are trying to sell themselves as performance Chinese bikes is kind of what I'm calling them now. Like the wind spaces, the Seekers, these ones that have become the trendy one. I mean, what was great about including the elves is it's still a really genuinely Chinese priced bike, as opposed to some of these new ones. Yeah, I think that's one for me. Apart from that, I mean, I think the protocol's fantastic. I think you've done an absolutely awesome job with it. Yeah, I read all the stuff, the aero socks, the helmets. It's all good stuff as far as I'm concerned. But Josh, thank you so much for coming on, spending some time with us, answering our questions. Obviously, we'll be linking down below to the article. It is behind the Cycling News paywall, so go and become a member of Cycling. Is it a member or subscriber? What are you calling it, Josh?
Tend to go with subscriber.
Subscriber?
Go with what you like.
Cycling News sub. Get over there and sub. But yeah, again, thank you so much, Josh, for coming on, and hopefully we'll stay in touch.
Thanks, Josh. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. No,
great to chat.
no problem. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.